Hi folks, welcome back to session number 6 in our advanced web workshops, which a lot of people are following with my Zoom live sessions, but for those of you who can't, this is for you, and it's also as a reminder so that the web workshop girls can go back and check up on things that they may have forgotten or just touch up on skills along the way. This is a very different sort of session. I'm going to work with two simplified versions of ice, working with ice, and working with a batik technique, which I have introduced to you before. We worked with Water-soluble Resist in other sessions, but I'm going to do a totally different thing with it today. And then ice, well, ice is nice. You're just going to have to wait for that one. It'll be the second part of this workshop. So, starting off with the water-soluble batik skills. In our silk painting sessions, the second one, I showed you how to use water-soluble batik, to do water-soluble batik through a stencil and then apply the colour all over it on silk. If things work on silk, my head starts thinking, does it work on other fabrics as well? Well, there's only one way to find out, isn't there? And that's to give it a go. Well, yes, it does. I'm not going to do the stencil one today because you've seen how to do that. And if you haven't caught up with that session yet, it's Silk 2 in the Introductory course. Anyway, I'm sure we'll explore it in greater detail later on in another session. Today, I'm going to take you a little further with that one. But first up, I want to talk to you a bit about batik in general. Water-soluble batik is one thing, but working with waxes and batik is a totally different thing. When you're working with water-soluble resist, you've got to remember that it is water-soluble. So can we do the layer after layer after layer that's associated with traditional batiks? No. I got into doing traditional batik a long time ago and was teaching it with paraffin wax and beeswax. Paraffin wax is part of the petrochemical industry. I like to keep all that sort of stuff out of my workshops and my studio. So I gave up teaching it, but let's talk you through the skill anyway. That batik method is where you start off with your fabric, whatever the colour of the fabric. I started with white. You apply a layer of wax. So the circles on this piece have been done first. Then you apply colour. My first coat of colour was yellow. I then used wax to keep the yellow areas and then applied another colour. So with this you're building up colour after colour, each colour then being affected by the colour beneath it, but layering your waxes so every time you apply the wax you keep that colour. Right, I applied wax where you see the lime strips on this sample piece. When that was dry, I then applied green, so the green and yellow became lime. And then I applied the darker colour, which was, I believe, either cyan or blue. It's a bit hard to tell when you're building up your colours like that. Here's a similar sort of thing that was done in the purples and starting on a lightly coloured fabric, a textured fabric. So yes, it's a build-up technique. Now, working with waxes, the traditional way, is fun, but getting that bloomin' wax out at the end of it all is not the fun part because you're ironing and ironing and ironing with layers and layers and layers of paper. There had to be a simpler way. What was that simpler way? That simpler way came to me quite by accident, by chance, when I was staying with a friend who was making candles. And she said, to me, oh Anne, we've got to get you into candle making because it's so much fun. Now, I'm not into candles, and so I didn't want to say that, but I said something like, well, you know, it's a bit messy for me. No, I don't think it will. And she said, oh, Anne, it's not really messy. If you get wax where you don't want it, that wax, you can just wash it out in hot sudsy water. Well, guys, I heard 3 words and that was it. I thought, wow, if you can get this wax into fabric and it just comes out in hot sudsy water, that's for me. So it was a case of going into experimentation mode, working with it, and yes, the pieces that you're seeing in front of me now are done with soy wax, professional grade soy wax, and we're not going to be using that one today. We're doing the water-soluble today. In our final session of this web workshop series, the advanced number 7, which is next, you'll be seeing me do that. So let's put those away. That's just to tempt you. Today, it's the water-soluble resist. And those of you who know me by now know that I'm not a confident drawer. So I'm going to use a tracing, and I'm going to show you how to use tracing to get the design onto your fabric. Look, I can draw gum leaves and gum blossoms, so I definitely did the gum leaves and gum blossoms by drawing them straight on. But if you were unconfident, you trace them on. Okay, here I have a simple design. Simple designs are going to work best. Something like maybe this fellow, which I fell in love with. It's just a case of tracing over it with a fat black felt pen. Going black and white first is easiest, so you can actually see the design better. And then the fat black felt pen, if it's juicy enough, soaks through and you touch it up and you've got your design prepared. Or you can take the design straight from some book. I'm sure you've got some of those around. We then lay our fabric over the design, and provided the design is firm enough, it's usually pretty easy to see through. Not all fabrics work well for this, so there's something really important that I now have to show you, and it's called the water drop test. So it'd be hard work to just grab any old piece of fabric and think, oh, I'll use that, and then find it wasn't going to do the right thing for you. On my board here, I have some different types of fabric. I've got some silk, I've got a couple of synthetics, polycottons, and I've got a couple of cottons, all in different weights, so I can show you what happens. I'm just going to drop water onto that fabric, and if the water goes in easily, it means that the resist will go through the fabric easily too. Let's do it. On the silk, goes in immediately. On the cotton, we'll do the lightweight one first. Sits there a moment, but going in quite easily. On the heavier cotton, this is the bleached calico, the white calico that I use so much. Straight in. On this polycotton, it's a lightweight polycotton. Yeah, that goes in nice and easily. So if the water goes in easily, so will the colour. And so will the resist. Here we go, on this heavier polycotton. That water drop is just sitting there. It gets that, see, beautiful magnification of the fibres through, where can you see it too? Yeah, there. But it's taking forever to go in, and that would mean that that would be a really difficult one to force the resist through. When you're doing your fabric designing too, sometimes we do work on dry fabrics. I know you've mainly seen me work on wet fabric, but working on dry, that water drop spread gives you an idea of how far your colours will spread to, so you're less likely to go into enemy territory that I talk about so much when we're working with Liquid Radiance. Okay, so let's get that out of the way and let's apply the water-soluble resist to our design. If you had a big design to do, it would make absolute sense to put a few pins in there. But I'm just going to give you a quick how-to here. We're going to flop that down behind the nozzle so it's ready for action. We have a pin handy in case there's a clog so we can clear the nozzle. We have some craft paper and our product. Flop it down. Start it in the craft paper, and we're going to use that just like a big fat pen with our thumb in the fat part of the bottle so we can maintain a nice pressure. Because for this one, we need a good line, a good clean line. I've actually done that top section of the design in a workshop earlier this afternoon, and that is dry, so I'm picking up where I started from. Pressing firmly in, I want to force that into the fabric as much as I can. Of course, it's going to go into different fabrics differently. On the daisies that you saw, and can still see if I put them there, I actually used a scribbling action to force that through, a bit the same as I'm doing on the dobs there on this starfish. Now I'll draw some circles, but they're fat worms, so that I have plenty of resist there to finish the entire piece. And push it through and end up with a good result. Okay, so I would then complete that whole design. You don't need to sit around waiting for me to complete that whole design. What I'm going to do now is show you the next step, and here's the reason why I do the next step. When I was first playing with this and wondering what would happen, I just left it where I've done it now. Okay, completed the whole starfish, sure, but left it in that state. And then I'm thinking, okay, once I've coloured that, the resist didn't come out cleanly. Still a nice result, still a good impression on the back, but I haven't got those crisp lines that you see on the gum leaves. So there's a trick to the next bit. There we've got the starfish with really crisp lines as opposed to a more blurred line. So I suppose if you want the more blurred one, you leave it alone. If you want the crisp one, it's a process I refer to as tickling through. Now, because I know this bench flares a bit, I'm just going to put a bit of black fabric there, and it'll make it easier for you to see what I'm doing. I need that to be anchored down. You don't have to use the black fabric, by the way. This is just for the filming. I'll get that pinned on firmly. You're going to work straight onto your old sheet or whatever you have on your table surface. You should have an old sheet or an old fabric curtain or something there, not plastic. So let's pretend we have completed adding the resist to our work of art. We're going to anchor our piece of fabric to presumably your old sheet. Remember, my black is only for your visibility. I like to use some masking tape for this. If I'm doing it on a garment, I will have a board, a painting board inside my garment, and that's a great way to keep it anchored because it's going to hold firmly at the shoulders. Anyway, we don't have any shoulders on a bit of fabric. If it was a bag, yes, you could stick a painting board inside your bag. Okay, now for the tickling through. I'm going to get underneath my fabric and I'm going to use a tickling action with my finger. Okay. And what that's going to do is force the resist through more easily. As you do it, you'll feel your finger get a little bit gooey, and that's okay, that's what we want it to do. What amazes me though, is even though I can feel that gooiness on my finger, well, that's a good thing, it doesn't smudge the reverse. I've never quite figured that out, why it doesn't. Probably because there's not enough of it there. So tickle, tickle, tickle. Get that all done. Needless to say, you're going to do your complete design and then put that aside to dry completely before you can colour it. Now for colouring your water-soluble batik. Just before I do that, I want to talk to you about something we're going to be doing in our next session that involves discharge work, working with bleach, discharge dyeing, except when working with Liquid Radiance, which isn't by formulation a dye. I can't draw that seahorse. It was one of the many uses I have for a stencil, so I just traced it on with chalk pencil. Then I used that tickling through method of securing the design area onto my garment, doing the fishy bubbles, or seahorsey bubbles maybe, and the reeds, and so on. And yep, that's Web Workshop 7 in the advanced series, which will be on YouTube too and on my website. Anyway, wanted to talk to you about another reason for using the tickling through method. Now that my one I prepared earlier is totally dry, I'm going to colour the starfish, and I like to use a spraying method for this because it particularly applies to the multi-level soy wax batik that we're also going to be doing in session number 7. We've got two ways of working the sprayers. We've got these little perfume type atomizers which fit perfectly into our dispenser bottles. So I simply take off the cap, pop in the sprayer, and you can see that one's way too long, and you can't, because I can't tip this over. So we cut that off to the required length, pop it in the bottle, and we're ready for action. Now these little fellas don't seal. They're not meant to seal. They don't seal. They're $2.50. What can you expect? They're not expensive gadgetry. But using a pump action with your finger, you can get a really fine mist. Obviously this is going to be, I'm just going to move this a bit, I think, just in case I get some overspray. Don't spill. What was I at? Yes, just in case we get that overspray, I'll move things around. Now they're delicate little fellas, and we just use a pump, pump, pump action. To colour our fabrics, I'm just going to go randomly here. The cap is off. What we've got to remember when we're working with these though is Liquid Radiance is by definition a paint, not a dye. And if I leave those sprayers in the bottle for any length of time, they are going to clog up. So the very first thing I'm going to do now is take them out now that the job's finished and just drop them in a little dish of water I have beside me and replace the cap on my diluted colour. bottle. Immediately, that resist on the one that was dry has become wet. And this is why you just can't do a multi-level batik with this. If you'd gone into enemy territory, that is if you saw puddles on your fabric, you can see that shininess where the resist has gone wet. Yeah, if you had multi-level colours and wax, it's just not going to work. If you had excess colour on there, if you saw puddles sitting there, you're going to need to blot that up, just like we remember all our rules all the time. Excess is the enemy. And while there's moisture, there's movement, so those colours will keep working there until they're dry. When it's dry, get rid of that, come back to these fellas, you simply pop that in water as soon as you can after it's finished and dry, completely dry. And then let it soak for about 20 minutes, then squish, squish, squish it with your fingers. You've seen me do that in the other water-soluble resist lesson where we worked through 2 layers. It will feel really gooey because there's quite a bit of resist in there. But the end result is just so simple. Whether you're working on woven fabric or stretch fabric, just be careful of the amount of resist you put in and make sure you tickle it through and your results will be fine. And like anything when you're working with Liquid Radiance, when it's all dry again, iron it to completely heat set it and make it light fast and colour fast forever. Next topic, working with ice to create amazing patterns in your fabric. Many years ago, we started hearing about ice dyeing, reading about it in magazines, seeing bits and pieces about it on various programs. And seeing the amazing patterns that can be created using ice. So, if it can be done with dyes, powder dyes, all sorts of other dyes, the toxic ones, you have to prepare your fabrics, you have to follow the instructions, you have to be really careful with it and you get all these amazing patterns, sure. So we tried it with Liquid Radiance and then we looked at it and we thought, hey, we can do all that with just our normal colouring techniques. We can do it without messing around with the drippers and the trays and the grids and the heavy rubber gloves to achieve it all. So, as is my usual way, we start playing with all sorts of things, and you may or may not have caught up with Nicely Iced, my article in Embellish magazine that goes back to issues 38. Right. A much simpler method of achieving really interesting results with ice. Very different from what you've probably read or seen before. But different is good. And knowing we can still do all those other things just by our normal colouring methods without the hoo-ha. Okay, basic equipment I have here. A family heirloom hammer. It doesn't have to be a family heirloom, it can be a nice one. I have an old towel. I have a cutting board, a wooden cutting board. This is not the sort of thing you're going to do on a glass tabletop. I have a couple of pieces of fabric ready to colour. And it's not messy, so I'm just going to put it down over my samples there. And I'm going to do a piece of cotton and I'm going to do a piece of silk. I've got the silk on some white plastic to make it easier for you to see what I'm doing. Okay, I have some ice. Now when you start doing this, you see that ice cubes come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. I've got this little container here that makes really cute little shape ice cubes. And there are all sorts of shapes around too. The rectangular ice cubes are going to give you a different shape from these little rounded ones. It's got a bit of excess ice on there that I'll take off. So I'm going to put my ice onto my fabric. Guys, I've got to tell you, this one is going to take just a little bit of practice to get it right. We need a dish and a teaspoon. That's to take the ice off when it's done its thing. Oh, these are stuck together. I won't say any rude words, I'll just grunt. Where are you going? So just spacing them apart a bit. Bother. I'll hit it with the hammer. You're going to come apart for me. A little half one here, that'll do the job. Just need to fill up those two corners a bit. Now I'm only doing a little sample, that's okay. If you are doing a big serious piece, you simply spread it out on plastic and work systematically from one end of it to the other. I can work on that little piece in one hit. So therefore, they're going to give me start that bit again. They are going to give me regular shaped parts of my design. If I want irregular shapes, I grab my old towel, I enclose some ice in it, and I hit it gently with my hammer. Yeah, a wooden cutting board underneath while you're doing this is really good. I think my neighbours sometimes think I'm doing a bit of house building when this is going on. You don't want to smash it to smithereens, okay, just get it nicely broken up. And you've got these irregular shaped bits which also give you really interesting patterns. So I'm going to do that on the silk shortly. But let's get the cotton piece working first. Yes, the fabrics absorb the water drop well. You can see those colours, water already spreading. The ice is melting. I'm going to use the colour concentrates, Liquid Radiance concentrates for this. And I'm simply going to put them a couple of drops on the top of the ice and let it melt. So in this technique, we're actually we're diluting the colours as the ice melts. And it takes a little bit of patience, not too much time. Always keeping in mind that excess is the enemy, and while there's moisture, there's movement. So we'll just watch that as the colours start to spread with the water. And while that's doing its thing, I'm going to start with the little chips of ice on the silk. We saw from the water drop earlier that this went really quickly. You can either just put on a little handful of or a little heap of the little chips, or you can put on the bigger bits, whatever you want. Can you get a regular pattern on silk? Yeah, you can. A little more tricky because it moves so fast. But I'm going to do exactly the same thing, and I'm a woman, I can do 3 things at once. So I'm keeping an eye on the first one I did. I'm throwing ice everywhere. Come here, you. And let's get this one going. The whole time I'm ready to whip that ice off at any stage where we start to get the fabric sloppy. Okay, do a greeny bluey one again, I think. Dab, dab, dab. That'll be an interesting one because I've got little fragments of ice going everywhere there. Yep, the ice is melting and the colour's travelling with it. I wish you were here having fun with me. What we're going to start doing is just waiting for the colours to spread enough, putting on a second layer if we want, and that second colour is going to push the first lot of ice away. Let's put some magenta on the blue. But if we then start to see puddles sitting on the silk, you've got to know when to whip that ice off, because we don't want it to go into enemy territory. Let's come back to our cotton piece. So I'll put that second colour on there. I don't always, but it is rather yummy. Let's put some blue, magenta on the blue, and some blue on the magenta. And we wait. Back to the silk. I was going to put some yellow on that green. It's almost done its thing. So I reckon if I don't get that ice off there soon, it will become very sloppy, and we know that if it's sloppy, you've got to get moppy. So the teaspoon comes into play. Off goes the ice. Guys, we know that when you're working with Liquid Radiance, if it's sloppy, you're just going to use another piece of fabric to mop up that sloppiness. So working with ice on silk or on a really light fabric is very, very random. But I think it's good fun. Looking at this one over here while I'm doing that. Can we use this ice over and over again? Yeah, of course you can, provided it hasn't melted. This one's pushing into really, really interesting shapes on this little bit of silk. And it's not sloppy, so I'm very happy now to leave that one alone to dry. Remembering that if you were going to do a long piece, you would start down one end and just work systematically along it, and you probably wouldn't be doing two things at once, which is not a good idea. Okay, work systematically along, putting on the ice, taking it off, putting on the colour, taking off the ice, you know? Over here, on the cotton, while there's moisture, there's movement. I might just turn that round so I'm not leaning in the wet silk. While there's moisture, there's movement. When you see the shapes starting to join up, as these are, then it's time to take the ice off those as well. Maybe leave that one just a bit longer. That one's ready to come off. Don't you want to come off? You liked it there. Yeah, I'll leave that one just a tiny bit longer as well. Okay, but I usually use the little finger test. If it's about the width of my little finger, I know it's ready to come off, because while there's moisture, there's movement. Even through the dry fabric, those colours are going to continue to bleed. And it was about at that stage, no, a bit more there, that I left the piece that I did in the live workshop earlier this afternoon. And you can see over time they've all joined up. The good news is, if you want to stop it and it's done enough, you've simply got to force dry it. You can either do that by, I'll take these off now, by putting it out in the sun and letting the sun do its work. It's after dark right now, so I could put it in front of the air conditioner. It's winter, the heater's on, so that'll dry that off. But it's got a little further to go, so I wouldn't do that until it all meets up. And that will stop it travelling further than you want it to. So you are in control as to when it will stop. I'll show you that one after I've talked you through a few more bits. So you can see with something like this, that was just nicely controlled with the little bits of chips of ice and then whipped off. You can see here how, because I've let it go a little further, they've sort of overlapped, but still a really nice result. Can we do this with any other product? No, not that I've found. The yellowy, orangey, reddy one here. Same deal. I'll just get rid of that heap of ice. And can we make mistakes with this? Yep, we sure can. We can let it go too far. Hey, it's still a nice bit of fabric, but you lose the integrity of what you're trying to achieve with the ice. But as a coloured piece of fabric, could we scrunch it? Sure. Could we salt it? Could we do all the things you know to do with fabric? Could we poke it into a grid? Could we put objects on it and put it out in the sun? Sure. If it hasn't done its thing as an ice piece, you've just gone into a really complicated way of colouring it. Wow, look at that. It's almost joined up now. Still got more to tell you. Yep, so it's just another colouring method, but to get it right, you've got to know how much or little colour to put on, how long to leave the ice on before you get rid of it and it goes too far. So here's a piece that did go too far, and it was simply a case of doing my regular scrunch, and I've got a nice piece of silk anyway. When I was writing for the article, I did images of the ice on the fabric, and it was getting really late in the afternoon. So you would, if you can pick up that article, we still have a few left in the back issues, or you can get them from the girls at Artwear Publications. This piece of fabric looked really great until it got late in the afternoon. I wanted to dry it. The sun was really bright way down my backyard. So I thought maybe if I pin this or peg this up onto a board and lean it, it'll dry quickly. While there's moisture, there's movement. You can see how those colours have sort of sagged. Again, a variation on a theme. Why not use it as a technique? It's a great piece of fabric. It just hasn't got that crisp edge that you would get if you didn't hang it at an angle. So you will find your own variations on this, I'm sure. Just using ice and not getting a lot of colour onto it. More colour onto it. Just play with it and see what you can achieve. Play with all the different sizes and shapes of ice blocks. They will all produce different results. Go into my web workshop page and pull out the extra notes that I've got on that too. You will see some different images there. So yeah, it's a good fun one to do. And we've got to end up with a disaster. Why do we have to use a fabric that accepts that water drop well? Here's a piece of unbleached calico, coloured exactly the same way as I've just shown you, and the colour just sat in puddles. It had no idea what to do because unbleached calico will not allow the water drop in, therefore the colour could not absorb and move. So yeah, try that water drop test, make sure you get it right, And if you get it right, here's the one we've just done, all finished. You'll have great results. I hope you have as much fun with it as I do. The silk, the cotton, and I think it's about time for me to go and put that one under the air conditioner in the kitchen and dry it off completely. Last step, Liquid Radiance needs to be heat set, half a minute for really strong colour, up to 2 minutes for really pale colour, and that's light fast and colour fast for all time. Enjoy, folks, and thanks for joining me.